Goal for today is to walk through basically a 20-minute overview of Assemblies. So hopefully we can crank right through it. If anyone has questions as I'm walking through the presentation, feel free to raise your hand. I think then you'll be allowed to come off of mute and ask those questions when the topics arise. And then at the end of this demonstration, about 20 minutes or so in, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A as well. I do not have a hard stop till the top of the hour. Again, I don't intend to use that time with the actual demonstration today. But if questions require that much time, we're obviously happy to spend the time to answer them. So awesome. Looks like we got about 30 so folks in here. So I think we'll get going, just to be mindful of time as people show up. I think they'll catch on with what we're providing today. But in terms of today's presentation, Power Lunch, episode 14. My name's Will Scatchard. I work in our West Coast office out here in San Diego, and we are going to be covering assemblies. I am a member of our sales team. Assemblies is honestly one of the topics that really gets me fired up because it's typically an area where we can save shops quite a bit of time when it comes to quoting and estimating these larger projects. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the sheet metal space. However, the concepts should apply to any shop, whether it's CNC, additive, of course, sheet metal assembly style work. If you ever have a specific question about your individual shop and how it pertains to what I'm showing today, please raise your hand and make sure that question gets answered. It's difficult to generalize. We've got a large audience, but I'm going to do my best. And in terms of the topic specifically that we're going to focus on, it will be BOM breakdown. So providing an overview of your bill of material here in Paperless Parts, allowing you to visualize those different components as you'd like to estimate them, regardless of if it's a small assembly, 1-2 item, maybe I'm thinking a machine shop with a dowel pin, helicoil, or if it's a very large, typically sheet metal style assembly, right? Where you're trying to deal with a very large BOM and wrap your mind around what's going on, how am I going to tackle this project? Second focus for today, bulk updating quote items, right? So making sure that we don't need to go in and dive into every single item in this BOM, especially when many of them are similar. How can we save time by bulk applying and bulk updating those quote items by applying a blanket process to them? For those of you folks more comfortable in paperless, that process term should resonate a little bit. And that's what we'll be talking about today for those of you who are maybe more new to our system. And then finally, understanding the costs versus price of this project. This is an area we spent a lot of last year really trying to support our customers in terms of, it's great if we understand the cost and what it will take for us to produce the project. But if we want to understand across different categories like material cost, inside operation cost, operations that we support on the floor, outside cost with OSP requirements, finishes, and finally purchase components, how can we give you an easy way to see and identify what those different buckets are from a cost perspective with the goal of allowing you to determine the final price you want to present to your customer? So these are going to be the 3 focus areas for today. Again, a lot of what you're going to see is around a sheet metal assembly, but the concept should apply to whatever type of work your shop supports. And to reiterate from a questions perspective, if we are on a topic where you feel like not covering something that you'd hope, or there's a question that comes top of mind, please raise your hand. It should be at the bottom of the screen there in the Zoom window. You'll be able to come off mute and ask that question. And then again, we'll save time here at the end to go through the Q&A where you'll be able to type up questions and we can respond to them here after the quick demonstration. But to jump right in, just want to make sure I'm forgetting anything. We're going to go right into the part viewer, right? So when we talk about viewing the BOM, this again is an area where we've spent a lot of time to make sure we have a solution that supports what our customers need. And this is the ability to, of course, view the different files that you receive from your customers today. You can do explode view here on the top of the screen and see all these different components separated out from one another. We can see the size of the part file we're dealing with when it comes to that entire project or that entire assembly. Then here on the left-hand side of the screen, we support you when it comes to viewing the individual sub-assemblies that make up the project, as well as the individual components, whether they're manufactured or purchased components that make up those projects as well, right? So with this top sub-assembly here at the base _sem, we can view the individual manufactured component, and then the 2 types of purchase components that make up that assembly as well, and view all of them isolated right here in our part viewer. Taking this a step further, where we've been able to save our customers a lot of time, is it's great that we can isolate these components, but through our partnership with PEM Engineering here on the right-hand side of the screen in this PEM Connect functionality, what we'll also do is allow you, if the fastener is a PEM fastener, get up to the minute cost and availability from the different distributors you may use for those fasteners. Now, what you'll notice here is those 3 different types of fasteners actually appeared automatically on the right-hand side of the screen because their naming matches something in the PEM catalog. Let's say we're working off of a PDF file, or maybe the naming convention does not add up directly to something in the PEM catalog. Very easy to search their current SKU availability, select a fastener here that's in the project, update the flat quantity. So how many of those are in the individual assembly? Maybe for this example, we'll say there are 5. We can add that as well. So very easily to manually add components. We're then able to view across the different distributors that provide the PEM hardware. We're able to view or sort down to each individual distributor. In this case, I'm in DB Roberts, and I can see what's the current cost and then what's the availability of these fasteners across all their distribution locations, right? Historically, this is something we understood where you have to pick up the phone, send an email, try to get an update manually from an external party. Goal is give the estimator all the information you need in one centralized platform, right? So parse out the BOM, and then in the case of PEM fasteners, obviously, they're great to have functionality of understanding cost and availability of those particular components. Now, if we jump into our quote, which I have just opened up in another tab here, we're working on our first quote item. So many folks should understand or be comfortable with the concept of having multiple quote items in the broader quote package. In this case, I'm in quote 3447. Quote item 1 is my assembly there that I had opened in the part viewer a moment ago. We'll see all the information about that part called out for us. I've entered in a few different quantity breaks just to show everyone what it looks like to space those out. And scrolling down, we have our top or our parent level process, right? So this will be those operations that apply to the entire assembly, right? Things like, for example, hardware install time, assembly time for our manufactured components. There was weld time required for this project, or a weld operation that would probably live at the top level as well. But it's the ability to have those operations similar to an ERP system, typically list them out, that apply to the entire project for us. Now, scrolling down, we'll have each of these components now broken out. So we have our 2 sub-assemblies listed out on top, just as you recall from the part viewer, where we isolated those 2 sub-assemblies for you. And then below that, we have our manufactured components and our purchase components now separated out from each other. Our goal here is to make it very easy for the team to understand what are the different components that make up this assembly. And now I can go through and start to parse out this information and work on this estimate for the team. So the first thing we'll notice is, because this is a net new job of mine, we have 2 components here that are obviously purchase components, right? We're not going to manufacture this stud, but they're currently living under the manufactured components section of our bill of material. We need to drop them down or convert them over to purchase components. So in Paperless Parts, the way we do that is in line with that component. We'll hit the 3 dots, corresponds to it, convert this over to a purchase component. And what that will pull in is essentially your drawer with your purchase components that you've either used previously, or a list of the purchase components that may come from your ERP system or the historical OEM part numbers or internal part numbers that you've estimated. Now, this smart match functionality is something we've seen save the team a lot of time when it comes to trying to remember, when's the last time I quoted this purchase component? What was the most recent cost I associated to it? And what we're able to do is say, this purchase component matches an OEM part number. It matches a geometry to something you've quoted previously, or there's a historical geometric match of this component to anything you've estimated or marked as a purchase component before. We won't automatically associate the two, right? You will need to select the component it corresponds to and convert that over. Because as you can probably imagine, there's quite a few purchase components that are relatively similar. But goal is save yourself time in terms of needing to go through and trying to manually remember, when's the last time I quoted that? What was the most recent cost we applied to it? Now we can call that out for you right away. That functionality works for PEM hardware, McMaster, any sort of purchase component that your team is operating and using today. Now, the other situation in there that we just walked through briefly, but I'm going to make sure we spend some more time on. If I convert this other purchase component down into my BOM or drop that down to the appropriate section, maybe I either hadn't quoted this before or haven't quoted this recently in Paperless. What that will pull up is your historical, again, database of all those different purchase components that you've used. You can search to determine or to identify this purchase component in that historical table, or you can create a new component right in Paperless Parts as well. I'm just going to select the AC440 for the sake of time and drop that down. Awesome. Perfect. So now we have our BOM broken out between the purchase components separated here at the bottom, and then the two manufactured components making up the middle of our bill of material. You'll see our cost is still zeroed out across the board, and that's because we have not applied a process to these components, right? If I click into this top.step file here, the bottom manufacturer component, and open that up, we'll see a dedicated area to estimate this job, but we have no operations or materials associated with this yet. So what I'm going to do is select both of these components here on the left-hand side, and under actions, I'm able to update my process, material, and finish for both of these components right here from the top level of our assembly. So I do not need to click into each component and manually add this information. So what I'm going to do again is just select my sheet metal laser process. I know my material here is 5052 H32 aluminum. There was a finish, I could apply that as well. And when I hit confirm, we're now going to apply that process to all of those components we've selected or identified here in the bill of material. All right, so now our cost will start to populate. And what that will show us here, if I click into this top.step file, or we start with this bottom one, is instead of that router showing the zeroed out variables, which it did a moment ago, we're now going to see again this dedicated area where we will highlight flat pattern, material costs based on what was currently on hand for a 5052. I think I do it per pound, but it could also be sheet costs. I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and then the different operations that I use for my sheet metal laser work, right? So no longer do we need to click into each component and manually update those. We're now able to do it all from the top level, and then we can go through and fine tune this, as I'm sure many of you have done, to make sure this estimate's ready to go for our customer. So now we have gone through, we've parsed out or broken down our assembly here in Paperless. We've applied costs to our purchase components and dropped those down to the appropriate section here in our bill of material. We've estimated out each one of these manufactured components. I'm of course doing it quickly, but I hope that everyone understands the concept. Let's say that there was maybe a part, I'm trying to also use the machine shop example here. Customer gives us an RFQ. They have a helicoil called out on a PDF, doesn't exist in the model, but I need to add that here to my estimate. What you're able to do is add components very easily to your BOM as well, right? So maybe to use that example, I'm going to add a purchase component here to the bottom of our BOM. We're going to select the helicoil that corresponds to, I don't have any at the top here, and just in the mindfulness of time, I'm going to select this hex nut. I could add the quantity. Maybe there was 3 of them in that called out on that PDF that the customer shared with us, and I'm going to add that now to my BOM. Right, so goal is make it very easy for the team to take into account some of those components that may not live in the geometry of the file, but of course need to be taken into account here when it comes to the estimate, and allow you to add those to your BOM very easily. So at this point, I've worked through my bill of material, and now I want to get to what's that cost I want to present to the customer, right? How do I want to present price when it comes to telling them what it will be and how much they need to pay me for this project? So the way that we do that in Paperless Parts is by showing you from a cost perspective, 4 different categories of price, and then your total estimated cost across each quantity rate that you're estimating for your customer. So we'll do that by material cost, inside cost, outside cost. If there's any OSPs, things like anodized paint, things you may not support in-house, and then our purchase component cost. Now we can view this from a dollar perspective, as we see called out here. And the other way I always like to mention is we can also view this from a percent perspective as well. I've seen a lot of customers use this percent concept to use as a good measure of saying, maybe if material gets over 15, 20% of the estimate, we need to go back and adjust that because it's getting to be a little bit too high relative to the other categories here that we're estimating and putting together for our customer. But very easy to now view this from the top level. And what we're able to do with that information now that we've gathered it is we can mark up or add margin to any one of these categories or across the entire quote here that we're putting together for the customer. So for example, if we just want to mark up material here by 15%, very easy to have that or populate that, in our estimate. We can also make these standardized. So as our estimating team starts to grow, maybe we've got some newer folks here working on these quotes, we can have these markups exist every single time they begin a quote for a customer. The other piece of this is we can have this be customer specific. So if there's a certain group of customers that you want to apply a markup to, you are able to add that here right to the estimated. And as soon as you select a customer from that group at the top of the quote, that markup or margin will always be applied. Finally, what that will allow us to do is come up with that final price that we want to present to the customer in the quote we're sending back to them. We're able to get review from the team and send it over. So that was what I had planned for today. Goal of showing you how to break down and visualize that BOM in Paperless, manipulate and adjust the purchase components from the manufacturer components and quote those out in our system. And then finally determine that final price through this colors and money functionality across the entire assembly we want to send back to the customer. I think we finished 1 minute ahead of schedule, which was great, but obviously happy to answer any questions the team has. And it looks like from a Q&A perspective, we've got one, Cindy Elder. Cindy Elder, is there a way to see the description rather than the OEM number before choosing to convert? Great question. So I guess it would depend, Cindy, that's a great question. It would depend on if you had the description saved in line with that purchase component in the table that lives in Paperless. So what I mean by that is if I select, I'm just going to select one of these manufactured components and hit convert to purchase component. If I pull up this table here, you are able to see the description of every purchase component that you have saved in Paperless. Obviously that field would just need to be populated by your team, right? So if you have a way today to I'm assuming you obviously have descriptions associated with your purchase components. If you have a way to export that into an Excel or CSV file, we would be able to import that here into Paperless and allow you to view that information through the system when you make that when you make that conversion. Sorry, I saw the question disappear there. Great question. And that's actually why we've added that column. Yeah, great question, Cindy. Awesome. Can you merge a quote item into an assembly? Great question. So yes, you can. And there's a few different ways to do that. First is on the left-hand side here, you can see I've got many different components, right, called out. Let's say quote item 3 and quote item 6 for the sake of the demonstration today. Let's say these are going to be welded together in an assembly, and I want to merge these 2 quote items into one assembly. If I'm answering this question incorrectly, please just jump in and put me on the right track. But I'm going to select quote item 3 and quote item 6, going to hit Actions, Make Assembly. I'll select the parent level or the top level of the assembly here, and I'm able to now merge these parts into one assembly. What that will do is now collapse quote item 3 and quote item 6 into the same quote item. So I will not see, I think, the 9 I currently have on the left, only see 8. And now we'll have quote item 3 marked as an assembly. And if I open, I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly. If I open that up, we will see the 2 components here listed out as manufactured components. So I can quote them as one individual assembly. Awesome. I hope that answered that question. If there is a follow-up to that, can you merge items into an existing assembly? Yes. So you would, and there's kind of a few ways to do that. I want to make sure I answer that entire question. There's a few ways to do that. Merging items into an existing assembly. The first is you can always copy over historical jobs. So let's say I quoted an assembly a week, a month, a year ago, whatever it may be. I can always at the top of any quote, copy over those quotes into net new jobs and then update and merge net new components into those assemblies, whether they're purchase components or manufactured components. Same way, I mean, it would operate the same way if it's an existing assembly. Maybe it's a net new assembly that I'm estimating, to use the net new example there. I would be able to incorporate an additional file the same way of merging these into an assembly, the same way I just walked through it a moment ago. So it doesn't need to be, I guess, to bring the question full circle, it does not need to be 2 individual items. It can be one existing assembly, and then I can merge in an additional item to that. Great question. If there's a follow-up there, please let me know. How does paperless parts deal with landed cost of purchase items, i.e. cost of part plus inbound shipping? Great question. I would say that's an awesome example of, we would look to understand how your team does that today. Because I don't think there's a blanket solution that, without having more of a conversation about it, David, that I could propose to you on the call. It would really depend on how your team thinks about shipping and incorporating that cost into each purchase component you work with. Whether it's a blanket, just I'm thinking markup or additional margin we want to add to those. For example, markup each one of those purchase components by 8%, something like that. Or if there's just a dollar figure you want to associate with every project that we can add. That's probably the best way I can answer that question without having a much longer conversation about it. Perfect. Let's see, next one. Can you search or filter sub-assemblies by status or other items? Awesome question. That was one that I did not get to today. So yes. And when you say status, I guess what I think of is the ability to track where we are in an assembly by updating what we call our workflow steps, right? So this is the ability to say, for example, with this top subassembly, maybe I have completed this and I can mark our workflow step as completed. But maybe this, the top subassembly here, the base underscore assembly, kind of confusing that the base is on the top here and then the top is on the bottom, but the base underscore assembly subassembly, maybe that's the one I'm currently working on. I'm able to update my workflow steps to say, this one is in progress. I would obviously be able to see that the top underscore assembly subassembly I've already completed. So now if I'm logging off the computer, if I'm exiting for whatever reason, when I'm sure, I doubt this ever happens, but when somebody comes to bother you, that was a joke, you're now able to see, where was I when I was working on this project? Where do I need to continue the estimate here and start to track your steps? And Tim, if I was way off with that answer and you intended it to be asked a different way or intended me to receive it a different way, please feel free to clarify. It's a good question. So, perfect. So I think we've answered all the questions, at least that I saw or that were open. Folks are still typing. Take your time. Again, we've got plenty of time here. Want to make sure everybody feels like their questions are answered. Great question. Yeah. Is there a way to change the order of the items? Yes, there is. So there's a few different ways you can do that. The first is on the left-hand side of the screen. All the different quote items you see called out, you're able to drag those around here as you need in your quote item, or excuse me, in your quote package, right? So now we're able to say, maybe we want the assemblies up top so that our team gets through those first. And I'm going to take this mill part and throw this down to the bottom so our team can get to that last, right? So it's very easy to organize the assemblies as they show up here inside of your quote items, I should say, inside of the quote. Will you send a recording of this? I don't know if we will send a recording of it, but I know we will feature this on the website. Allie, do you know, will we send a recording of this afterwards?
Yes. Yep, we'll send it to everyone's email within the next couple of business days.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And there are, I guess that's probably a good time to plug. We do these power lunches typically once a month. I think our next one's going to be scheduled for June 22nd is the current date we're aiming for. But there have been some great ones in the past about assemblies in much more detail than I went through today, specifically the one that my colleague Dana Wensberg walked through. And in that, he actually talks about, Tim, moving to your question here, can you move the order in an assembly? That's where he talks about the ability to navigate sub-assemblies and moving up and down the tree as you build it out in paperless parts, right? So goal there is, of course, allow your team, and Tim answering your question, allow the team to quote the project as it's intended here in paperless, but then to bring that full circle, if you do have an ERP integration with our system, that BOM routing structure that's built out here in paperless parts is how it will transfer into your ERP as well. So the order in terms of the hierarchy of the bill of material here in our system will all be transferred over into the ERP as well if you do have an ERP integration with paperless parts. All right. How does paperless parts deal with a part that is imported a single part but must be broken up into multiple parts to manufacture? Absolutely. So in that situation, what we would do is we would be able to, and I think this brings up, David, it's a great question. It brings up a much broader concept that not all files you receive from your customers will be entirely accurate, right? Maybe they connected the two part files and they're intended to be two separate part files. Maybe they forgot to include helicoils, studs, whatever it may be that you need to add to the BOM itself. That's where our goal is to use as much of that geometry as we can to get you started on that estimate, but then always allow you to manipulate that bill of material as needed to put together that quote for your customer, right? So that's where we can say, I can add a manufactured component here to my BOM to make up that multiple part or parts that need to be accounted for here in the estimate, right? Because we're going to need to include more than one manufactured component here in our bill of material versus what the file looks like, which is just the one large file, right? So this is where we can just add that manual manufacturer component to make up those multiple parts. And we can add as many of these as we need. So part number 1, 2, 3, 4. Node quantity. Perfect. Awesome. Roby, can you bring, Roby, hope you're doing well. Can you bring a sub-assembly into another assembly? Yes, you can. And the way you would do that, Dana's overview provides a very in detail way of how you can move up and down the BOM structure. Given the fact that he spent a lot of hands-on with the product, he would be able to, I think his webinar does a much better job of showing that. But what you are able to do is actually move up and down the BOM here, and you are able to, if I go to the child BOM, you are able to move these move these nodes up and down and merge a subassembly into another assembly. Awesome. Perfect. Let's see. Tim, when you have assemblies with many parts and you mark some of the parts as old or in progress, can you see those items? Also, is there a way to see the percentage complete of an assembly? Perfect. So 2 questions. Let's unpack those. Both great questions. So the short answer is yes, right? And the way that we're able to see to the first question, when you have assemblies with many parts, you mark some of the parts as hold or in progress, can you see those items? Again, the answer there is yes. And we're able to see that here when we can update our workflow step to say this component is in progress, or maybe we'll say to, I guess, speak to the question, this component's on hold for whatever reason. We're able to see that called out now inside of our BOM, like you'll see the color changes to red. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, we're able to open up that BOM and see that on hold called out corresponding to the quote item that is on hold. Right, and that, just to confirm, that's corresponding to the individual part, not the entire subassembly or the broader assembly. Also, is there a way to see the percentage complete of an assembly? So it would depend on how you define percentage complete. So no filtering. So I don't want to get too off topic here, but what we would allow you to do through our workflows dashboard is track to see what, I guess I'll provide some context here to this. So if I jump into my dashboard here, right, what we're able to see is the progress in terms of percent complete of a particular job. If I open up that progress, we can track to see for the individual components that make up that job, what's complete, what's in progress, what's on hold. So I hope that that provides a bit more context, Tim. You are able to filter to see what's in progress. You can filter the status bar. So from the top level, you can, and then opening it up, you can see for each quote item. Now this will be across the entire quote item. So across the entire assembly, across the manufactured components, the individual ones as they show up, but you can view that information here in Paperless. All right, let's see, next one. Can you turn a manufactured component into a subassembly? I had an assembly where the BOM was not structured correctly. I needed one item to be turned into an assembly and move hardware from the top level into it. Yes, you can. So if we go back down to our BOM here, this is where we have the ability to move components up and down BOM. The BOM structure, right? So we can move things up a level or down a level, and we can turn, for example, manufactured components into assemblies, right? If we need to add, for example, hardware, or if we need to add, purchase components to those. And again, I think I actually watched Dana's this morning, which is why I'm saying this, Jeff. He goes into a lot of detail when it pertains to moving up and down a BOM structure to show how we can convert manufactured components to the top subassembly level in the example he walked through, and then apply hardware to those as subassemblies at that point as well. Great questions. This is good. Awesome. Well, let's see. Is there a way to hide an item? That is a good one. I guess when you say hide an item, it would depend on, like, do we want to delete the item? I think it would depend on the goal of that, right? Because there's definitely certain ways we would be able to accommodate it. It would depend on it would depend on what the goal of that exercise was. Like, do we just want to include it as a $0 item so it shows up on our BOM, but have no cost associated with it? There would be different ways I'm sure we could tackle that one. And Cindy, that may be a great opportunity to chat with your, here you go. Some of our customers will have several parts on a quote, and then maybe a year later want one part updated, but we don't want to delete everything and also not requote everything. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like a great customer ask there. Some of our customers will have several parts on a quote, and then maybe a year later want one part updated, but we don't want to delete everything. Also, okay, so it sounds like in that example, you are in paperless parts. What you would do is you would copy over this historical quote. Like, let's say it's a year from now, our customer sends back an RFQ and they only want this top quote item estimated for them. They don't want anything else that in this example we had already walked through and quoted for them a year ago. So what we would do is open up this historical quote that we put together a year ago here in paperless. We copy this over into a net new quote, or we could create a revision that will populate all the different quote items. And I'm getting full circle to the answer here. That will populate all the historical quote items we put together a year ago for our customer. But what we would be able to do is actually select all of the components that the customer does not want us to estimate for them again, because now they're only asking for one item, and we could remove or delete all of those other items from the quote to just focus on the one item they'd like us to, I'm going to say, refresh pricing for, because I think in that example, using the year or so amount of time that's gone by, we're probably going to update our material costs, maybe our labor rates change, maybe we want to update purchase components if it is an assembly, but very easy to do that here. There we go. All right, next question. Cindy, if there's a follow-up question there as well, please let me know. All right, the filtering and percent complete are only available in the top level quote, not inside assemblies and sub-assemblies. I think when working with assemblies, think working with assemblies with over 50 parts or multiple assemblies. So from the workflow, great question. From the workflows perspective there on the main screen that I showed Tim, correct, you can only view it per quote item. So whether it's one manufacturer component or an assembly of 2 components or 200, you're looking at percent complete across that entire, quote item. I think that was the question there. If there was a specific question, please feel free to clarify. But when you do click in, to take it a step further, when you do click into an assembly, that's where you'll be able to see, coming back to this, if I jump into this top quote item once again, and I'm in quote number 3447. If I click into this top quote item, I am then able to see in that bill of material, what have I estimated, what's on hold, and I can see that called out for me here once I get to that assembly. So I guess to bring that question full circle, I'm able to see that this quote item as the assembly over 50 parts, over 100 parts, whatever it may be. I'm able to see that that quote item is in progress. I can click into that quote item, which would bring you to this screen where you're viewing that specific assembly here that we're referencing. And then I can open that up and see what have I estimated, what is in progress for me, down to the individual item level. Good question. Awesome. All right. So any additional questions, please feel free to post them there in the chat. I'm still happy to answer them. I just wanted to share kind of our final slide here. Thanking everyone so much for your time this afternoon or this morning, if you're out on the West Coast like I am. As you can see, got the sunrise here behind me. We have all of our power lunches. I think we're up to, I guess today was 14, so we're up to 14 power lunches here, stored on our website, always accessible to you to go and view. This is my contact information, first name dot last name at Paperless Parts is my email. That's my cell phone number right there. If anyone has any questions after today that they want to discuss in more detail, have a great holiday weekend, Sydney. I actually forgot about that. So we've got a great holiday weekend coming up. I hope you all enjoy it. And feel free to reach out to your CSMs or anyone else from the Paperless Parts team if you want to discuss anything else in more detail. But I think with that, unless there are any final questions from the team, I think with that, we are going to wrap it up for today. Thank you all for your time. Have a great Thursday and enjoy your weekend. Take care.